Have you ever watched someone you love disappear right before your eyes and no one could explain how? That was the day my life changed forever. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where the sun painted the sky gold and the streets of our little town buzzed with families hurrying to church. My mother, a woman every woman knew as quiet, faithful, and humble, held my hands as we walked into the massive white walled church that morning. The choir was already in full swing, voices rising like thunder, drums shaking the ground. The church was alive with dancing, clapping, and shouting. I remember looking at my mother and seeing something strange in her eyes. A kind of fear, like she knew something I didn't. When the testimony time came, she stood up. Slowly, she made her way to the altar, holding her wrapper tightly, her scarf barely clinging to her head. She looked back at me once, and I swear I saw tears in her eyes. The microphone trembled in her hands as she said, "God save me from the trap of my enemies." But her voice was shaky, her gaze darting around the church, as if she saw something no one else could. The pastor shouted, "Somebody shout amen." The whole church thundered amen. And in that moment, my mother's scarf slipped from her head and fell to the ground. But my mother, she was gone. She didn't walk away, she didn't collapse, she didn't run. She simply vanished. The entire church froze. People screamed. Some fell to the floor. Others shouted prayers. The usher swore she had not passed through any door. The woman behind her said she disappeared into thin air. I shouted her name again and again, but only silence answered me. That was the day I lost my mother, or maybe the day she was taken. The chaos that followed her disappearance was unlike anything I had ever seen. Some people ran out of the church screaming, others fell to their knees, that the rapture had started. A few whispered that it was juju, that someone had used black magic on my mother. The pastor kept shouting, trying to calm the crowd. His face was drenched in sweat, his eyes wide like he had seen a ghost. I remember running to the altar, clutching the scarf my mother had left behind. It was still warm in my hands, as though she had only just touched it. I screamed, "Mama, Mama," but she didn't answer. Police were eventually called. They searched every corner of the church, every room, every hallway, even the pastor's office, but she was gone. When I told them she simply disappeared before my eyes, they exchanged pity looks, as though I was a grieving child speaking nonsense. One of them said maybe she fainted and someone carried her away. Maybe she slept outside while everyone was distracted. But I knew what I saw. That night, the house was too quiet. Her wrapper still hung on the line outside. Her pot of soup still sat on the firewood stove. Her bed was neatly made, but she wasn't there. And then I found it. A piece of paper folded and tucked deep into her Bible. The paper was torn, her handwriting hurried, as though she wrote it in a rush. And on the paper read, "If I disappear, don't trust anyone in this church." My hands trembled as I read those words again and again. My mother had known something was coming. She had expected it. The next Sunday, I returned to the church, not to pray, but to watch. I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. The way the ushers gathered the pastor like soldiers. The way people who went up to testify seemed nervous, some even trembling before they spoke. The way the pastor's eyes followed them, cold and calculating. And then I remembered something. My mother had looked at the back door, almost like she saw someone there. I went to that back door and pushed it open. It cracked loudly, leading into a narrow hallway I had never noticed before. The air was damp, the walls cracked. At the end of the hallway was a wooden door, locked with a giant padlock. I pressed my ears against it. At first, I heard nothing. Then faint whispers, like voices chanting. Fear clawed up my spine. I didn't know if I was ready for what I was about to uncover. But I knew one thing. My mother didn't vanish by accident. And if the church held the answers, then that was where I would start digging. I couldn't sleep for nights. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's scarf falling to the ground. Each time I opened my eyes, I saw her handwriting, "Don't trust anyone in this church." But how could I not? This was the place where I was raised, the place where my mother sang in the choir, the place where we prayed for protection. Still, my God told me something was wrong. So I returned, not on a Sunday, but on a Tuesday evening when the church was nearly empty. The big gates were open, but only a handful of people were cleaning inside. I slipped past them and went straight to the narrow hallway behind the altar. The padlock was still there, hanging like a warning. But I came prepared. With a stone and trembling hands, I struck it again and again until it cracked open. The door creaked as I pushed it. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. It was a chamber, dark, damp, and lined with shelves. On the shelves were files, dozens, maybe hundreds, each with names scribbled in red ink. I pulled one out. It was filled with details, names of people who had once testified in the church. Some names I recognized, people who had suddenly left town, people I hadn't seen in years, people no one ever spoke about anymore. At the bottom of the shelf, I found another file. My hands shook as I opened it. It was my mother's name. Her photograph was paper clipped to the front, and under it, in a bold red letters, it read, "Successful offering, completed." My knees almost gave way. What did it mean? What kind of offering was my mother? Before I could think further, I heard footsteps. I quickly shoved the file under my shirt and pressed myself against the wall. Two men walked in. They were ushers. One of them carried a lantern and the other one a bag. They whispered as they moved towards the back of the chamber. "Pastor says the girl is asking too many questions," one muttered. "She's her daughter, of course she will," the other replied. "Doesn't matter. If she doesn't stop, she will end up like her mother." I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they heard it. They left after a while, but their words stayed with me. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a miracle. My mother's disappearance had been planned, and now they were coming for me. That night, I hid the file under my mattress. I couldn't tell anyone, not even my neighbors, because I don't know who was safe anymore. The church, the place meant to save souls, was hiding secrets darker than death. And if I wanted to find my mother, I had to go deeper into that darkness. For days, I carried the weight of that file like a curse. It whispered to me at night, "Successful offering." It wasn't just words, it was proof. Proof that my mother's disappearance was not of God, not of chance, but of men. But what did it mean? I returned to the church again, this time hiding in the shadow, during a Friday night vigil. The crowd sang and prayed, the air heavy with incense and heat, but I wasn't watching them. My eyes were fixed on the pastor. He was a large man, his white suit glowing under the stage lights. He shouted, he prophesied, he promised miracles, but then he said something that made my skin crawl. Not everyone who testifies can remain with us. Some are chosen as seeds. Seeds that must fall so that others may rise. The crowd shouted, "Amen." But I felt like vomiting. I slipped out of the main hall and went back to the hidden chamber. This time, I carried a small torch. At the very back of the room, I noticed something I had missed before. A wooden trapdoor on the ground. It was partly covered with sacks. My hands shook as I pulled them aside and lifted the hatch. A wave of damp, foul air hit me. I climbed down in the darkness. Beneath the church was a cave, larger than I expected. Candles flickered on the stone altars. Strange symbols were drawn on the walls in black and red. And at the center was a massive bowl, filled with not water but with ashes. And around that bowl, ropes, white ropes, torn and burned. My heart stopped when I saw a familiar fabric among them. A patterned cloth, my mother's wrapper. Tears blurred my eyes. My legs went weak. I almost screamed, but then I heard voices approaching. I ducked behind the altar as the pastor himself walked in, followed by two ushers. "Another one will still testify this Sunday," the pastor said, his voice calm, almost cold. "The sacrifice must continue. That is the covenant that builds this church. Without offering, there is no prosperity." The ushers nodded silently. "And what about the girl?" one of them asked. "She suspects," the other added. The pastor smiled. "She will be dealt with just like her mother." My blood froze. It was all through the testimonies, the vanishing, the fear in people's eyes. It was all part of a ritual, a covenant built on human lives, disguised as miracles. And my mother, she had discovered it. She tried to speak out, but they silenced her. I stumbled back in the shadows, my hands brushing against something cold, a hymn book, old and dusty, half buried under the rubble. When I picked it up, a folded paper fell out. I opened it and my breath caught. It was a letter, my mother's handwriting. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Do not weep for me. My fight was not for myself, but for you. I could not escape, but I left this truth behind. Use it. Expose them. Do not let fear silence you. I clutched the letter to my chest, choking on tears. I wanted to run, to scream, to call the police, but then the pastor's voice thundered again. No one must ever know what happens here. God's name covers it, and so shall it remain. In that moment, I made a decision. If my mother died protecting the truth, then I would live to reveal it. I got home that night and I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bed with my mother's letter spread across my laps and the file I had stolen under my pillow. Her words spun into me. Use it. Expose them. Don't let fear silence you. But how do you fight men who hid behind God's name? How do you battle a pastor who commands hundreds, who people would die to protect? By morning, I had my answer. Not with shouts, not with fists, but with the truth. I took the file, the letter, and the hymn book to a journalist in the town, a woman known for chasing dangerous stories. At first, she didn't believe me, but then she read my mother's letter and saw the names in the files. Her eyes widened. This is bigger than you think, she whispered. Within weeks, an investigation began. Police raided the church in the middle of a night vigil. Beneath the altar, they found the chamber. They found the files. They found evidence of people who had disappeared, names too many to ignore. The pastor was arrested. His face, once adored on billboards and posters, now filled newspapers with the headline, Miracle Pastor or Master of Rituals. But victory did not taste sweet because through it all, my mother never returned. The church was shut down, the members scattered, and justice was served, but at the cost of my mother's life. And yet, sometimes late at night, when I sit by her Bible, I feel her presence. One evening, as I flipped through its worn pages, a second note fell out, one I had somehow missed before. It read, "If I vanish, remember this. I did not leave you. I became your shield. My silence is the price of your voice. Speak, my child, and live." Tears streamed down my face. For the first time since she vanished, I smiled. My mother had disappeared in the church that day, but her voice still lived in me. And as long as I told her story, she was never truly gone.